Sparkbrook is a multicultural ward. It's about 50% made up of ethnic minorities, the other half white indigenous in terms of profile. It's one of the poorest wards in Birmingham. It's got one of the highest unemployment figures, not just in Birmingham but in the country. But on a positive note, despite the extreme economic deprivation levels, we've also got a neighbourhood vanguard, which has been recognised nationally because of the community cohesion that we have, as well as the fact in surveys when people in Birmingham were asked which area they felt most happy in, where they lived, and also where they felt they had the most influence in local decision making, Borsall Heath, which is part of Sparkbrook ward, came out top. And so this government is actually looking at what we've been doing in achieving this and saying that they want to roll it out nationally. Now they're going to do it under the big society label. Obviously, as respect councillors, we reject their ethos, which I believe is about cutting back public spending. But in terms of recognising the contribution of the voluntary sector and of local citizens, then I would say what's happening here in our ward is very, very exciting.
You've been a councillor since 2006. How has Sparkbrook changed during that time?
Well, I think seeing what happened with Project Champion, for me, is one measure of how Sparkbrook is actually different from other wards, and I would say it's partly to do with the kind of representation that now is happening in Sparkbrook. For many, many years, it was seen as Labour voting fodder. The councillors didn't have to work particularly hard. They felt there was an automatic vote there. But now that there's respect representation there, we have clear lines on where we stand, whether it's on the economy or on civil liberties. And so when Project Champion happened, when we saw these cameras coming in, when we asked the right questions, even when we didn't get the answers, we persisted. And finally the truth emerged, and I think that was a lot to do with the fact we had huge public meetings, concerned citizens, people felt they had the right to ask questions in a democratic, peaceful way, and were a lobbying force. And I don't think that had we not had the kind of experience within the ward where people do feel a sense of ownership on what happens in the area, right from, we have school walking buses where parents get together and they help children from all the local streets to walk to school. We have Christmas hampers given out. We have multicultural carol singing where people from all backgrounds come. We just did it at the old people's homes. We have this genuine sense of belonging and pride in the area and feeling that stake. And I think that's what surprised the council leadership and the local police. So although Project Champion extended far beyond Sparkbrook ward, I think it's noticeable that the largest outcry was from within Sparkbrook itself, and I think we would not have seen the U-turn that we've seen had we not had the active participation. So I would say some changes have definitely occurred, some positive changes, and for me it's frustrating in the current climate that a lot of that goodwill, a lot of that empowerment, I feel, is under threat with these very real cuts, which are really about now people not having just to fight for building on what's already been gained, but to fight to keep what has been gained, just in purely simple services that we already have.
So would you say that the community has been politicised over recent years?
Definitely, because we very, very consciously, right from the beginning, didn't just pander to the lowest political factor, which we've seen especially in local elections where it's just either character assassination or avoiding the bigger political questions. It's almost seen as a no-go area, ironically, in politics. Whereas we've argued about the war, we've argued about the international situation, we've argued about the national economic situation, explaining how it directly affects us right here. And we have never shied away from that. And having that clarity, unpacking what is happening, as well as providing a real practical alternative and fighting for that and articulating that, I think has meant a whole generation of politicised people. And I think that's for the benefit of democracy as a whole.
Last Tuesday there was a Sparkbrook ward committee meeting. I was just wondering whether you gauged any general feeling or fears about the cuts and whether there was any decision made at that meeting on how to oppose them.
Well, as councillors, we obviously look at what's happening in Sparkbrook, and there are real issues around what's happening in schools. There are real concerns about what's happening with the leisure services, and so we have always been upfront about our opposition to the cuts. We've been upfront about our defending of council workers, because I know they're feeling very vulnerable, and often that's the very time when, instead of having the solidarity and confidence, people think, well, I've got to protect my job, so I'm going to keep my head down, and I better not speak up. And that's why I think it's so important that, you know, even if you're not a council worker, you come out and defend council workers. And often, if you look at the demographics of who council workers are, it is women, it is working mothers, part-time, it is and what's going to happen when these people lose their jobs? You know, they're going to be claiming benefit. So actually it's going to be a drain on society, and they're not going to be contributing the taxes that they are. So again, it makes no economic sense. It's a short-term measure designed to balance some false books, and actually it's something totally unnecessary, and what will lead to is devastating poverty. And all the work that's gone in the last few years to try and just a few percentage points to reduce the inequalities that we've got, because that's all that's happened over the last decade. You know, it's about 1 or 2 percentage points in terms of the improvements. All of that will be removed at a stroke with these kinds of measures.
I was wondering as well whether you'd received any answer to your question to the leader of Birmingham City Council regarding how raising tuition fees and cutting the EMA will encourage young people into education.
Well, his answer was, we're doing really well on GCSEs, and it's not our place in Birmingham Council to get involved in national policy. So absolutely ridiculous answer on both fronts, because of course it is a job of Birmingham City Council, the largest authority in Europe, to lobby national government on issues of concern to its citizens. It has done on housing, for example. And so this was a complete, really, removal and abdication of their responsibility, because they don't have the answers. They know somewhere what they're doing is wrong. They know they can't defend it. On the last Tuesday's council meeting, they barricaded themselves in because they were so scared of student protests. So for the first time since I've been a councillor, you know, the main doors were locked, we had security inside. I'd asked for a debate on student fees, they had no response to it. So they locked them out physically, they lock out debate within the council chamber, and I think it's an absolute disgrace. And as I mentioned, we're the youngest city in Europe, and of course it's a job of the local city council leader to defend and stand up for young people. So no, there was no direct answer. And I think it's quite telling of the contempt they view even their own Birmingham citizens, that's kind of answer I received upon raising a very important question.
Local bloggers and journalists have faced a similar brick wall of response, really. Do you think that local bloggers, local journalists, citizen journalists have a role to play in bringing out the issues concerning these budget cuts, and that it shouldn't just be left to the local official press?
Yeah.
And as councillors, do you think that Birmingham City Council should be more open, more accountable, and more willing to speak to people and not just give the excuse that they're very busy and very important people?
Well, of course. I mean, they were elected there by the people, for the people, so accountability should be second nature, not something that they should be shying away from. And it's very telling that they have these press conferences with their chosen journalists, because this is what embedded journalism looks like, that you're taken in, maybe there's a quid pro quo that you'll get certain stories and you'll get this favoured treatment, and in return they get these more positive stories. And I think that's really corrupting of democracy. The media, and independent media, I think is a key partner in civil society to ensure the openness and that transparency. And of course not every journalist is like that, but worryingly we do have an establishment journalism which too often does toe that line, which too often simply echoes the press releases that are given, you know, where we don't have that level of research and rigour and scrutiny that I think is helpful for democracy, which is why I think bloggers and sites like Birmingham Budget Cuts is so important to distill real information and bring it out in the open. It's because only when you have information can you make informed choices. And coming back to, you know, what I think is different in Sparkbrook, the way we've campaigned consistently throughout the year at every election, we don't waste space in our newsletters just attacking other people for the sake of it. We just bring out facts so that people can make informed choices. So for me, it's not even about whether people vote respect or not. It's about having a more informed citizenship. So if you're going to vote for a different party, at least you know what you're voting for. You know, too often we have politicians say one thing and refuse to actually stick to that pledge when it matters in the voting chambers. We've seen it with the Lib Dems, where they went on the streets and said we're against tuition fees. We pledge that if we get elected in the House of Commons, we will oppose any rise in tuition fees, and they've done the very opposite. In fact, as people now at least know that, they know what they need to do at the next election, but it'll be their decision. But for too long, we've had a situation where there wasn't that clarity, where people were not upfront about what they stood for, and certainly once they got elected, nobody knew what they were doing in those elected chambers, whether it was at a local level or a national level, which is why I think blogging and websites and alternative media is so key right now.
Well, the press office would argue that they haven't got the time or the resources to deal with every blogger, every journalist, every person who wants to write a story on it. Do you think that's a legitimate excuse?
No, because the information, if it's available, should be available to all. So actually, it's not doubling up any more time, because obviously the issues of the day are the issues of the day. So you're going to get questions around the economy, around the cuts. It's not rocket science. So have your facts and be prepared to share them.
They would also argue that by speaking to the local official press, that they're getting their message out to a wider audience than, say, a blog that gets 200 readers. So you'd say that even though that it may not have that many readers or regular subscribers to that particular site, that they should still provide an equal amount of information than they do to the established press.
Well, if they did a proper job in the first place of being honest in their press releases and honest about their facts, that would be available to all regardless. And in terms of internet access and the influence of bloggers, don't underestimate it, because I know that a lot of journalists are scanning the internet trying to pick up stories from bloggers, and different sites, because and so actually they can influence both ways. So don't underestimate the influence of bloggers, I would say.